Evening all. Yes. Stop nagging me. I will get a haircut. Okay, I'm booked in for Thursday. Right. Okay. Enough. Right. I've borrowed my eldest son's bedroom for this because the light's better at the moment. What I want to talk today about is one of my all-time favourite films, Rollerball, and I want to look at the politics of the world of Rollerball. Now, and when I say Rollerball, I mean the 1975 version with James Caan. I do not mean the 2000s remake, which is diabolical. And I won't be referring to the short story by Harry Harrison either, because even though Harry Harrison's a very good writer, pardon me, and he wrote a good short story, I think the film actually improves on the world building aspect of the novel. So this is about the 1975 film. Now, the premise in Rollerball. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen Rollerball, go out and watch it. And I say, spoiler alerts, go and watch it. Go and download it, get it off Netflix or buy a copy, whatever. Watch Rollerball, and then you can come back to this video later. But if you have seen Rollerball, I'm going to give a kind of spoilers and all analysis. So the thing about Rollerball, the world that it postulates, is that it's set in the near future from the time the film was made in 1975. It's actually 2018, current year. But it's set approximately 50-ish years into the future. And the political landscape of the world has changed. Government and big business have merged. And the running of society and the world is done through megacorporations. It's alluded to in the film that at some point, about a generation or more previously, there were these things called the corporate wars, but it's not really elaborated on what kind of war it was. From the look of the film, it doesn't look like it was a massive military confrontation. The world of Rollerball in their version of 2018 is not an irradiated post-apocalyptic hellhole. Nature is still intact. The world's cities are still intact with recognizable landmarks. So it seems that the corporate wars were more like a series of coups d'etats, maybe even cyber war, with the private megacorporations gaining control of various governments, and also hostile corporate takeovers, probably involving private military forces, to merge things like energy companies into one energy corporation, all transportation industries and government structures merged into one transportation corporation. So the world of Rollerball is one where megacorporations have their different departments, which they run the world. The only one we get to see in the film in any detail is the Energy Corporation, headed up by a man called Bartholomew, played by John Houseman. And when I see Rollerball, I'm so reminded Houseman's character is very much like George Soros in a lot of ways. So we see a couple of times in the film big board meetings done by video conferencing with the other heads of the corporations. But we don't go into detail about what the other corporations are, but we know that they control huge sectors of the world and society. But unlike running it like a government, they run it on a corporate structure with a boardroom, and with every citizen or employee of that corporation being a shareholder. Now, the effect that it has on the society of Rollerball is one where the corporation, we don't see major financial transactions. They never mention a currency in Rollerball. But what happens is that the corporations give things in kind. It's a very affluent society that we see. Mind you, we are skewed towards either high-powered business executives or successful sportsmen. It's mostly their world, but we get a glimpse of how people live and how the functions are. It's a very clean society. It's very ordered. It's a world without too much want, and it's a world completely devoid of violence except in one area. Hint, hint. But the thing about the Society of Rollerball is that you go to work for one of these corporations, And the better you do, the more rewards you get. The higher up the corporate chain you go, and the higher up the corporate chain you go, the more goodies and rewards you get. Now, the thing is, everything's a commodity in the world of Rollerball, even relationships. The main character is Rollerball's greatest star, Jonathan E. Jonathan E, played by James Caan, is the greatest Rollerball player of all time, and he plays for the World Championship team, which is Houston, which is sponsored by the Energy Corporation. And he has a wife, or at least he had a wife, as part of the backstory of his character. But the thing is that he has risen so far in the sporting world, but the sporting world only has a limit on its usefulness to the corporate society. And a corporate executive who's much higher up just said, I like your wife, Jonathan. She's my wife now. She's my wife now, Dave. So what happens there is that Jonathan feels a sense of loss, of betrayal. There's an emptiness in his life he can't fill. It's a personal relationship that he had with his wife, but his wife is seen as a commodity to be exchanged and traded. The Energy Corporation, in response, has the attitude of, sorry, you've lost your wife, but that's just the way society works. Here, have a concubine. Oh, you don't like that concubine? Have another concubine. You don't like them? Have two concubines. And that's how it works, but it's never satisfactory for Jonathan. In the story, it is his wife. It's the personal emotional bond, but there are no personal emotional bonds in Rollerball. Jonathan struggles against this. He has his best friend who is paralyzed in a Rollerball match between Houston and Tokyo, and it leaves the best friend in a vegetative state. And normally the corporate thing is he's in a vegetative state, switch the life support off, his life is over. But Jonathan kind of exerts a power of attorney to keep his best friend still alive. It's a kind of, there's a personal bond between him and his best friend, which he's not going to let the corporation override, the corporation take control. Even though it seems illogical to keep a man in a permanent vegetative state on a life support machine, Jonathan still does it. Partly out of loyalty to his friend, partly because, yes, it doesn't make sense, but that's precisely the point. It's like the relationship with his wife. No, that a deep emotional bond does not make sense in the corporate world, but to Jonathan, it does. And so I said that violence is non-existent in the world of Rollerball. And there's one scene, there's a party scene, executive party scene in the film, where all these rich people, and if you think the idea of wives and women being tradable commodities is sexist, well, at the executive party scene, a higher up female executive talks about having male toy boys, and she disparagingly refers to young, fit men as kind of robots, for her, even though we would call them NPCs these days. But that's the way she sees it. So it's not as sexist as it sounds. People and their relationships are tradable commodities. And in this dinner party scene, no, it's not a dinner party, it's just a standard party, somebody unearths an artifact. It's a laser pistol, which is from a bygone age. It's rare enough that people are fascinated, and they go out and they shoot trees with this laser gun to show just how decadent they are, and that people have lost value in the meaning of living things. There's just no value in it. And we see this most pointedly in the games of Rollerball itself. Rollerball is an exceedingly violent sport. Play with motorcycles, spiked gloves, steel balls, and roller skates, where you're not... the rules of the game are you're not supposed to go out and deliberately murder your opponents, but death is an occupational hazard. Injury is far more likely. You don't have to go in with lethal intent. And the game as played, you can be fouled for a penalty in Rollerball, even though they're very lax on the level of violence that is permitted. And this is the outlet for the general public. They go and see Rollerball games because, like gladiatorial combat, it's playing to that sort of base animal hunter-killer side of human nature, but channeling it into this violent game. The other thing that the game serves to exist is to illustrate the futility of individual effort. So you're not supposed to be good at the game. You go in, you can be reasonably successful, but at some point you are going to be injured out of the game, or you're going to be killed playing the game, or your body just won't be able to take it. And Jonathan's the exception. He's a man in his early 30s who's become exceptionally good at the game. And he has not just a cult following, but a following all over the world. He is the world's most famous sportsman in rollerball, which is why it's also one of the best. It's my all-time favorite sporting movie, let alone a kind of science fiction political commentary. It is absolutely the best sports film ever made. It's not an underdog story because he's the world champion. He's the best player in the world playing for the world champion team. But what's interesting is that Jonathan is trying to connect with the human side of him. And it's probably because he's playing a visceral game. He is walking that line between life and death just by playing the game, that it's connected him more to the things he values, why he values his wife, because he could die at any time playing rollerball. And he's valuing things more. But one of the other interesting things about the politics of rollerball is the way the corporate society maintains information. And that is, throughout the film, Jonathan's trying to find out how corporate society works. He's got some issues with it. They want him to retire. The game has rewarded him to the maximum level the corporations think he should be rewarded. And they think he can't go any higher, so they want him to retire. And if he won't retire, and he refuses to retire in the film, they're going to change the rules. They arbitrarily change the rules in order to kill him in a game if he doesn't walk away from it. But he stays the course, and he's trying to find out more about what happened during the corporate wars, how are corporate decisions made, and how his society functions. But of course, the corporations have controlled the information. He goes to a standard library, they won't tell him anything. Oh, the file you're looking for is missing. He goes all the way to the most powerful computer in the world, which is in Switzerland, and he asks the most powerful computer in the world about the corporate society and how decisions are made, and it has cognitive dissonance, this supercomputer, the HAL of the world of rollerball, and it just shuts down, just starts babbling, and it won't tell him anything. And you never find out the reason why and how the corporate society works. So Jonathan goes back to the visceral world, and he plays in this final rigged game of rollerball. And he conquers it, and he conquers it by re-establishing the rules of the game. The game, this final game, Houston versus New York, is solely designed to kill Jonathan. And so there's no penalties, no time limits, no substitutions. And everybody in the game, on both sides, is either killed or injured to the point where they can't continue the match. And Jonathan's there at the end. He's with him, two New York players, and they're going to gun down, and they're going to get him, kill him, because that's their instructions. And he knocks one out, and he basically pummels the other to the point where the New York player just can't resist anymore, just sort of flops, exhausted, spent. And Jonathan picks up the ball, and he scores the goal. He scores the only goal of the game. Just to remind people, it is still a sport, and sport has value, and sport has meaning, and sport has a transformative human experience, playing it and watching it. It's a very human competitive experience, and he is not just gone along with the mayhem and the killing. He's actually reminded people that this is a sport, and a sport should have rules, and a sport should have competition. And of course, at the end, everybody watching, it's the most televised rollerball game in history, and everybody in the stadium and everybody around the world just chants his name, Jonathan, Jonathan. It's a fantastic ending, and it rocks the corporate world. But when I look at the world today, so what has rollerball got that's relevant to today's political scene? Well, we are seeing, particularly in the European Union, this kind of merger between big business and government function. I suppose you could say it had its roots, its origins in the kind of Blairite private-public initiative of getting private companies and the government working together on big public works schemes like railway building, hospital building. Of course, it didn't work very well for the Labour government under Tony Blair. But this idea that in Europe as well, that Europe loves big corporations. The bigger the corporation you are and based in Europe, the more they love you there. And to the point where was Articles 11 and 13 of the European Copyright Act actually designed and implemented by big European media and tech companies. And they just used the European Union as useful fools to push forward their agenda. Of course, we know that, and people always complain about the effect that big business has on politics. But to the extent that the EU and big business seem to be hand in glove with each other, it shows a little bit about just where big business and government can merge to control society. And in the figure of George Soros, who I said, you watch John Houseman's portrayal in Rollerball, and the similarities with George Soros, thinking he is so big, he can just dictate to countries what he wants, his agenda, his messianic complex. However, in the world of Rollerball, where Mr. Bartholomew might think he is the Messiah, giving the world the corporate version, the true Messiah, the true chosen one, is Jonathan E., the Rollerball star. So, go back. Watch the film. If you haven't watched it for a while, do watch it. It's one of my all-time favourite films, and I think there's a lot there that's very prescient at the moment. Okay, current year, this is Nick signing off. See you next time.